So in our outer loop, this will sort of be the vertical, all right? The vertical as we move down the y-axis, and we'll do lines of ASCII text. Now we need an inner loop to do the horizontal. So the inner loop for the horizontal, or the x-axis, we may start out and let's initialize a variable, we'll call it columns. Again, let's start at 1, and let's say, well, columns is less than or equal to. Now, this needs to be a changing value, because as we move down the rows in a triangle, we have a point at the top, so we're only going to have one character, but we want to increase the characters that we print as we move down vertically, down the y-axis or through the rows, iterating through the rows. So in this case, I want to say, well, columns is less than or equal to rows, and notice that in the outer loop, rows is going to change. Sure, it starts out as 1, but it's, we're adding or incrementing as we move down the y-axis, so it'll keep getting larger, and therefore, if we, have the same relationship in the inner for loop, then our columns will get larger as we go down, and that's what we want. And then, of course, the last thing we want to do is, again, increment columns. Okay, and what we want to do inside this loop is to display a character, and we just want to add a line as we move down. So okay, so here's our outer loop and here's our inner loop. Let's go ahead and build the project. And there's our triangle. Okay, so just some simple examples of nesting with for loops and repetition structures, and playing with the values, decrementing, incrementing. You could make diamonds and reverse triangles, isosceles triangles, all different kinds of shapes, just using ASCII characters. But later, when we get into arrays and we get into animation and graphics, they will become very powerful and useful tools. Now let's make a pyramid, and we'll make this with 10 rows. And think about a pyramid, it's very narrow at the top, there's a point, and then it gets wider as it moves vertically down the y-axis towards the base. So if I look at columns here, in the very first column, if we were to say in the outer loop, as long as it's less than rows, and rows having a fixed value of 10, that's going to give us our movement down the y-axis. Alright, so our vertical movement towards the base of the pyramid, or the triangle, in this case, two-dimensional. In the inner loop here, we're just going to have 2 inner loops, and we're going to add some spacing. And the relationship here is, as we increase columns, we're going to decrease j. And so for every iteration in this outer loop, as we, column starts out at 0, and then we'll add 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. In this inner loop, we're going to say, well, j is equal to rows, so it's always going to be 10. It's a fixed value. And then the condition is, as long as it's greater than columns. Well, think about it. The very first time through, columns is 0, and j is 10. So is j greater than columns? Well, sure. 10 is greater than 0. It's going to decrement j, so basically just going to display 10 spaces there. And this whole loop here would go, and this is the same thing, by the way, as saying this. If just a matter of preference, I kind of like to put curly braces on my for loops, and that way, if you add other lines of code in, you know what goes with with each block of code in a for loop. You can do it this way with just a semicolon, but remember that if you do that, it's only going to execute the very first line, not any lines or statements that come after that, unless they were put inside of or placed inside of braces. So just alternative ways of pretty much doing the same thing, but you don't have to use the curly braces, but if you don't, it's only going to execute the line of code, the statement directly beneath it. I kind of like my braces there, but we'll do it this way. So anyway, this is going to happen 10 times, and then we're going to get down to here, and then, okay, so k starts out at 0, well, k is less than columns. Well, the first time through, columns has a value of 0. So k is equal to columns. It's not less than. So this never happens the very first time through. So yes, we get 10 spaces, but we don't display an asterisk. And then we add a line, so we move down to the next row. And then see where it's highlighted, we'll move back up here, we iterate, and now we've added 1, and we've incremented columns, postfix incremented it, so it's no longer 0, it's 1. Go over here and think about it. So now as far as the number of spacing, it was 10, now it would be 1 less. J is still 10, but while 10 is greater than no longer 0, but now while 10 is greater than 1, we will decrement J. So not 10 spaces, 9. So as we move down each row, we'll have less and less spaces going all the way towards the bottom. On the other hand, what about this? In this case, since columns is 1 and k starts out at 0, well, as long as k is less than columns, well, columns is 1, k is 0, so the condition is true. So this will happen once on the second row or the second line. We're going to postfix increment k. So in this case, it'll just add a space and an asterisk. And then we come down to the bottom of the loop, we'll iterate, we'll come back up here again. And let's run that and see what it looks like. Okay, so move this down here. So you can see, here's our triangle, our pyramid. Here's the top. And if you wanted to, if I were to change the space to a visible character, you could see how that is decreasing as it moves down. See these pipe symbols here? So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And that's simply decreasing as we decrement, as columns increases and J decreases. Okay. Change it back to a space and rebuild the project there. Okay, so first time through, just 10 spaces, no asterisks. Second time through, 9 spaces and an asterisk. Now let's look at it again this time. So now, the third iteration through this loop, columns will now no longer have a value of 1, but a value of 2. So again, that would be less spaces because while j is greater than 2, it's going to, and we're decrementing, it's going to happen less times than if we said while j is greater than 1 or j is greater than 0. Now on the other hand, this is going to happen more. If columns now has a value of 2 and k is always 0, now that's going to happen twice. So space, asterisk, space, asterisk, just like it goes down here. So you can see how, the whole thing just kind of goes, moves all the way down the rows to make our tree or our pyramid. And finally, let's take that idea, that pyramid, and let's turn it upside down. And if we do, we'll have a diamond. And we pretty much just need to reverse a few things that we did previously. So here column started out at 0. Now column starts out at 10, the value of rows. Here we said well columns is less than rows. Here we're saying well columns is greater than 0. Here we incremented, here we decrement. Okay? So this relationship here is completely the inverse, or the opposite, of what it was here, as far as our outer for loop is concerned. Maybe I'll add a comment tag up here, top half. That makes things a bit clearer. Okay, and so yeah, there's, in this case it's complete inverse. Now, on the other hand, look at the spacing. So j is still initialized to the value of rows, and while it's greater than columns, we decrement. So it's the same relationship. That didn't change as far as the inner loop. Look at the way the asterisks are displayed or printed. Same relationship, all right? K is initialized to 0 while it's less than columns, and we increment it, a postfix increment. So nothing's changed really in the inner loops, but it's the outer loop that has the, the exact opposite or the inverse relationship. And let's build that and take a look at it. Let me drag this up here so you can see, and there's our diamond.